Good evening, everyone. My name's John Stuart, and I am the Associate Dean for Cultural and Community Engagement at FIU's College of Communication, Architecture, and the Arts. It's Monday night, so it must be Zen and the Art of. And I'm here with my wonderful co-conspirator in this, Deborah Briggs. In real life, the Miami Beach Urban Studios on Miami Beach, where I'm executive director, is very close by to the Betsy Hotel. And in spirit, the Miami Beach Urban Studios and the Betsy Hotel are very close. And these last 19 weeks have made us even closer as we've every Monday tried to bring content that would inspire us to think about our place in the world and inspire us to think about ways in which we can find our center and our peace and calm. And so, Deborah, you know that you helped to inspire that in me. So I'm delighted to see you here tonight.
Hey everybody, it's nice to see everyone. You'll note that my backdrop tonight is a little light. That's my, what do you call it? The scenery behind my head is a light because we're looking for the light tonight. I wanted to thank John for his lovely welcome. It always is, makes me feel like I'm in the right place Monday night at 7 o'clock. I also wanted to just take a moment to thank Jessica and Colette tonight because without them, John and I, literally, we couldn't be doing this every week. They make it run on time. We've been working with some incredible partners over the past few months, and I just wanted to mention them. I know I do it every time, but again, without partners, we aren't anywhere. So the City of Miami Beach Department of Arts and Culture is amazing, and MBUS, Miami Beach Urban Studios, is a pillar organization of the City of Miami Beach. And I am privileged to serve on the board of MBUS. Also wanted to thank the Miami-Dade County because they are our advocates nationally now with the City of Miami Beach for the power of the arts to bring people together. And I think this community we've all created together is a testament to how the arts can do positive things for us. At FIU, we're working with MBUS, also the Department of Architecture on tonight's event, and the College of Communications, Architecture, and the Arts, CARTA, which MBUS is part of. I'm here tonight representing the Betsy Hotel that is owned by my family, and other affiliated partners with the Betsy are the Plutzik Foundation and the Betsy Community Fund at the Miami Foundation. And then you guys, our audience, over 1,500 households in 19 weeks have joined us. And you know, it's a time of isolation and fear for a lot of us. And what are we doing here tonight? We're looking toward the light and looking for some Zen. And so I'm really excited tonight. Nick is going to take us on a journey into his head and into his creative mind, his creativity. We did a really exciting run through today. And so I know something great is in store for us tonight. So thank you so much, everybody. I'll pass it back to John and he'll introduce Nick.
Perfect. Thank you, Deborah. And Nick, I am delighted to see you here among us. And I want to tell you that it's been, you've been part of the FIU family, I think, for maybe 7, 8, 9 years.
Since 2012, yeah.
12 years? Wow. Time flies when you're having this much fun. I just remember your first interview at FIU. You were amazing then, and you continue to amaze us all now. And so there were a couple of factors, I think, that play very strongly in your work that kind of made it a no-brainer for Deborah and me to invite you to be part of this. And some of those are the way in which you take material studies so seriously and you kind of really investigate how things are made and you're interested in making things. And the other is kind of the poetics behind what you make and what you're interested in. And there's always this kind of conversation between the kind of pragmatism of making and the poetics of meaning that kind of comes out in everything that you seem to work on. So I asked you tonight if you would start this conversation by giving a kind of a little overview of your work for those of you who might not be familiar with what you do, and then we'll talk about your new book, which is obviously right behind me here. And actually, I promised to put up a link. I will do that to a Books and Books link to find it. And in the meantime, I think you'll be sharing your screen a little bit. So please, for those of you on the call, don't mind the disruption. I find screen sharing to be a very disruptive experience in Zoom, but it's sometimes a very good thing, especially when somebody like Nick is going to share his work with us. So Nick,
All
take
right.
it away.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Deborah. And John, time does fly. I always enjoy listening to you speak about me because you say things about me that I don't realize on my own. So thank you for inviting me here. No, this is great. I'm really happy to be here and try to describe some aspect of Zen in my life. And I would say that making architecture, designing architecture, it is a kind of meditative state for me. I enjoy doing it, and sometimes I become less Zen when I don't get to do it. But I wanted to just, for those of you who aren't familiar with me, and I'm planning to kind of end with a conversation about my recently published book, but I wanted to give just a quick overview of maybe 3 projects that I've done that are important to me and relevant to the whole conversation. This is my house in Miami Beach, and this is an old 1962 house. You can see this roof jog here. Anyway, we took an old house, and the story of this house begins with this tree, which is an invasive species tree in South Florida called the Melaleuca tree, which is native to Australia. For a variety of reasons, it was scattered by aircraft, by the Army Corps of Engineers in the Everglades. But it's a real environmental problem. And I had the opportunity through a grant with a great partner at FIU who funded this research to look for potentials to use this kind of unwanted tree in new productive ways. And what you see on the left is the tree, and what you see on the right is a compression cylinder of concrete, where we actually took the tree, chipped it up into wood chips, cast it into concrete, and then tested the material strength for it. And then here are some of the various forms and textures we were able to get. And I'll tell you that this is a wood-based concrete, and concrete to me was always something that came out of a bag that you mix with water, and you just followed a recipe. I didn't really question it much, but by thinking about how to substitute wood and bring wood into the mix, it really made me investigate all aspects of all the ingredients of concrete. And we started to develop unique formulas, reducing the amount of sand, the amount of water. And we really customized our own mix, which is much lighter weight than traditional concrete. And you see here another view of the house. Where that roof jog is, we did a small addition to make it a little bit bigger, but we didn't really want to accentuate the boundary between new and old. We wanted to blend that together. So we clad the southern elevation of the house with these tiles that are precast using this material. And because the material is wood is a less dense material than concrete. It has a higher insulation value. It's more lightweight. And in a way, this was a test for this material. It's never really been used in the tropics. It really hasn't been used very much anywhere. And it was the kind of first attempt at something like this. We consider this house a kind of living mock-up, meaning we evaluate it and still live with it and its uncertainty. These are views of the elevations of the house. You see where this line is. Everything beyond that is new. We basically extended the house a little bit. And it's this deep U-shaped house. And when you enter, it's great. You see on the right and left. On the left is the addition. And on the right was the existing wing. It's a really deep U-shape. To enter, you walk all the way up this deep courtyard, and the front door is way at the back. So you're kind of inside the embrace of this house while you're still outside of it. And courtyards are very, typically part of tropical modernism, and it's a space in the house that we spend a lot of time in. This is a view from the front door one morning when Miami rarely has fog, but I think there was a fire in the Everglades and all the fog, blew down the street. So we got this photo shortly after we moved in. And here's another photo of it. And so, this house was really, the interior, it's a great house. I invite you all over to come drink coffee with me in the morning and watch the shadows. But it's a kind of playful house. The shadows change throughout the day. This is in the early evening with the lights turned on. And before this, you know, part of the thinking of that house came out of some work I had done previously, where I wanted to really investigate materials, but typically the architect's role is reduced to, you know, drawing and kind of flat representation like drawing. And so what I wanted to do, these are sheets of plywood, very thin sheets of plywood that we carved patterns into and then flexed. And I made a series of, you know, kind of architectural prototypes or archetypes. This is a wall that we call the flex wall that squeezes up and opens up. This is like an unstable structure where the frame would just tumble over if it weren't for the skin propping it up, kind of like a flying buttress. And then these were really exercises about frame and skin and their relationships. On this one, you see that the frame actually lifts off the ground. The skin actually lifts the frame off the ground, which is counterintuitive. Usually the frame supports the skin. And in this case, it's vice versa. And then another one of these. And you know, these kind of took on the patterning of bird feathers and fish scales and things like that. And this was an exhibition of all these small prototypes I did in Ohio when I used to teach at Ohio State. And then I had the opportunity in Boston to build a pavilion. A pavilion's an inhabitable scale structure. And I took kind of all the lessons of working with a material and bending it carefully and carving these intricate patterns into it. And I came up with this design for a pavilion called the Unflat Pavilion. And it's really an idea about, you know, again, we, especially in the United States, and this is something that I've found more in my book, but especially in the United States, we really build buildings with very flat media, very flat, thin sheets of film, you know, flat drawings are used. And this was an idea about thickening. So we called it the Unflat Pavilion, where everything we use started flat, but became unflattened. And we were able to kind of take all the aspects of those earlier furniture sized objects and kind of combine them into one pavilion. You see it here. And it's, you know, it was large enough to house quite a few people. It was an open air pavilion. It kind of looks like a modern day tiki hut, but computationally conceived and digitally fabricated. But you see here, this wall on the bottom right actually lifts up from the ground and the skin is actually supporting it. And to do it at the scale, we had to, you know, contend with quite a bit of engineering and other factors. This is a plan of how you could kind of meander through it and slip through shifts in the skin. And you can see it activated. This was on the Charles River in Boston, and you can see the Prudential Center in the building. But to make this work, quite a bit of investigation went into, you know, different species of trees, the wood from different trees. And actually, these were two of the hardest pieces to fabricate. Like we split the wood quite a few times. We had to try different species of wood and kind of a diagram of how we put it together. And then here it is from the inside with that wall lifting. On the top left is a view from the outside, and you see the wall peeling up in the background. And then this is the inside. And this became like a furniture height table. And then here it is. This is part of MIT's 150th anniversary, the year I got married in 2011. And what was great, at night, we illuminated the cavity. So everywhere, you know, the wall kind of distorted a little bit, light leaked out of the cavity and illuminated the ground around it. And then last is a project I did the summer after for my mother, my best client. And she needed a barn. So we built this barn. I didn't have clients back then, so she was my best client. And this is a traditional building type in the South called a pole barn, where there's no foundations or footings. It's really the skin gives it stability. And the poles are buried, you know, 3 feet deep into the ground. And the whole thing really floats above the earth. And so it became a kind of Zen-like space for a barn. In fact, like, you know, we wanted to have parties out there and eat dinner out there. It was just great to be inside of it. And then I met a gallery owner, Gary Wasserman, who also sponsored the grant for the material research I showed at the beginning. And he partnered me with this artist on the right named Linenbrink. And he thought we had some things in common. I had done this, and we both kind of work with bright pigments and lines and patterning. But Marcus will find a space and really paint these kind of psychedelic lines. And he works with his own custom pigments. He mixes them. For those of you in Miami, he did the SLS Brickell parking garage, that 7-story building. You may recognize it from this. And he asked us to design a pavilion. He wanted to feature Marcus's work for a new gallery he opened in Detroit, but he didn't really want him to paint his new gallery. So he asked me to design a pavilion for him to paint. So I worked with the artist. I worked with Marcus Linenbrink, about how he doesn't really design the spaces he paints. He usually finds them. So we worked, these are photographs of it. This is the inside of this pavilion, which is kind of like a geode. Like you could just stand inside the painting and be completely immersed in it. And then this is the outside of it. And some drawings showing the lines and the patterning. But he lived in Brooklyn, I was in Miami, and we would unfold like origami the design of the pavilion, and I would mail it to him, and he would take markers and color it and then send photos back to me, and we would trace it. And we worked back and forth in that way. And we built the entire thing on a steel chassis with industrial wheels and casters, so you could split it open in the gallery and expose it, or you could completely close it off again and enter it and kind of be isolated from the gallery and just immersed in the artwork. And then, so a variety of approaches in some of those projects. Please visit my website after the talk. There are more projects, but John is not a fan of screen sharing, so I'll allow that.
Yeah. No, Nick, if you can maybe, there are a couple questions. One was about the materials that you used in terms of the wood that you use. You used wood in a lot of your projects, from the very first one that you showed, the wood materials, to your mother's barn. You use it in your own house, to there, you're using wood. Are there different kinds of woods that you use? Did you try other ones than Melaleuca, for example, in the concrete? Or did you, when you had difficulty with the wood samples in that project, in the MIT project, did you choose other woods? You have to know a lot about wood to be able to do this, it seems.
It's interesting. Wood, it's like a hobbyist material. Like there are wood carvers in school. When you build a presentation model, you build it out of basswood, which is a softwood. It's kind of easy to work with, and it kind of gives a formal resolution to the project, a finality to it. But it also scales quite easily. So, there's very small sheets of plywood I was showing for this project. Then we were just really scaling up to a standard plywood sheet that comes in 4 foot by 8. And actually, this project here, this in a way, this started this as well. Like we looked at using synthetic wood, like hardy board and cement board. This is in Louisiana with a similar climate to Miami, where wood really decomposes quickly. And we were kind of exploring different products like Trex and composite things. And our neighbor said, all these old plantation houses have been around for 200 years, and they're just pine. They're #1 clear pine with a stain. So we stained all these slats, these 3 different shades of blue and gray, and tried to animate it in that way. But we went, with a very traditional, we learned a lot actually just by kind of excavating the traditional formula for buildings there. And then, in Miami, it's interesting, wood is kind of outlawed in a way. The insurance industry would rather you construct out of concrete. It's more wind resistant. Termites don't get it. But I would say the wood, I admire metal workers. And I taught a class at FIU where we looked at sheet metal, and we traveled to Kansas City and met with the most advanced sheet metal fabricators. But that is not a hobbyist material. I mean, so much investment has to go into experimenting with metal that I would say, I have often relied on wood. In Miami, it becomes more difficult. I mean, and you see a lot of things that are like faux wood, things that look like wood, but are actually not. Usually when you're seeing it in Miami, it's typically not true wood.
I just wanted to jump in here, since you've got the picture up of the pavilion, that this is, somebody had asked about what the meaning of poetics is in architecture. And and I was just going to take a stab at it with your work with Marcus Linenbrink, because it was a kind of an architectural design that had a strong sculptural element in it, to it, that was kind of fabricated and conceived with an artist and then utilized by musicians, because I think there were chamber concerts in this pavilion, the way it kind of opened and closed and allowed for these different moments. And so I think if I were going to take a stab at that, that might be one way to do it, is to think about the way all these art forms kind of come together and share in a dialogue. But maybe you have another idea. You work so closely with Stephen Hall and with others. You know, what is your sense of what the poetics of architecture might entail?
I mean, you know, yeah, Stephen Hall is a mentor of mine, a great architect in New York who I worked with, and you know, he is kind of known as an architect who builds with light, which is a kind of intangible thing. And you know, he watercolors, which is a little loose, and he kind of finds the form of the building in the watercolor sketch. And a chapter of my book is dedicated to one of his projects. But you know, I think if you think about a poem, it exists of words the way a building exists with bricks, but there's a certain, let's say, pattern to it that makes it poetic, or makes it take on the form of a poem. And so I think certain buildings done in that way exist in that way. And to me, they're buildings that ask questions, and don't seem so certain and stable. And in a way, that kind of gets into the idea of a mock-up, which is
to segue into your, yes, of course, we will get there. Yes. Why don't you either stop screen sharing, or because I can obviously have this, or you can, go to that mock-up and talk about that.
Yeah, I'll show this. I won't show anything else in the book besides the cover. But it was a labor of love, this book, and I had a 1-year book contract. It took me 5 years, but I traveled around the world to write this and interviewed architects I didn't even really know, who I sincerely admire now. But if you're curious what we're talking about with the mock-up, this was kind of my first introduction to the idea. This guy in the hat in the middle with the binoculars is Frank Lloyd Wright in 1936 in Racine, Wisconsin. And basically, he designed the S.E. Johnson Wax building with these columns, which broke all the rules of the day. It was, only 9 inches at the base, and the kind of standard engineering proportion said this should be close to 30 inches at the base. It was too slender. It flared at the top, and it just broke all the rules. And Wright was a kind of structural master builder, famous for, he built a hotel in Tokyo where they had this really serious earthquake, and his building was one of the few that suffered very little damage. But he submitted the drawings to the building commissioner in Wisconsin, and they were rejected. And they said, there's no way, like, these need to support, I think, 6 tons each. They actually didn't support very much. They became the ceiling, and they were connected with skylights. But they said, there's no way. And he said, I can prove it, and let me build this and show you it works. And that's what this photo is of. And I have quite a few photos of this documented in the book. But basically, this is it. They loaded this up all the way with 60 tons. So it supported, 10 times what it was required. And then it's a kind of, this is where this idea took hold, this idea that he submitted drawings. The drawings can't really represent the behavior of the materials. It's kind of beyond the capacity of representation. And in order to build it, you have to first build it to show it. A line I use in the book says they had to first build it in order to build it. And so this is a really important image to me. And then I started thinking in the book, what are other examples of mock-ups? What is really a mock-up? And to me, it's something in between drawing and building, where this was drawn but not quite trusted. And it's very easy to draw something that won't actually work, because there are no limits on what you draw and what you could represent.
So I want to jump in here because I have the picture on the cover of the book, and you have it there too. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that project, because I thought you spoke really, and you write in the book very, very beautifully about this, about how, you know, how we imagine other worlds as architects, how we're constantly being asked to envision a future and then making it happen. And so there's a process that's between now and this future, and that involves, as you point out, involves, I mean, drawing and more traditional forms of kind of imagining, but also making these full-scale prototypes. And they're kind of like drawing not with ink going onto paper, but instead with kind of with material on material of many forms. Do you want to talk a little bit about, and you talk about specifically, I think, with this project, would you like to talk a little bit about that, since I have the image up and you have the image up too?
Yeah, I was really happy the publisher accepted this photo for the cover. For one thing, the publisher has very strict guidelines about the quality of photographs that they'll publish. And all of these projects are really construction site photographs that are nobody's professionally photographing these things. It's usually the architect themselves. So, you know, this is a photo of this architect in Paraguay, in Asunción, Paraguay, who, and I think I titled the chapter "Painting with Bricks," or the alchemy of bricks. Basically, Paraguay is one of 2 landlocked countries in South America, and it's a kind of poorer country than its surrounding, because they don't have the ports that these other countries have. But basically, this architect, as a result of such scarcity and lack of resource, basically everything is brick in Paraguay. Like, to build something with steel, it's very expensive. So brick is kind of the cheapest thing that you could use. But in a way, he uses bricks like we would use steel. And he uses bricks out of necessity, but he doesn't really allow that to constrain his creativity. So kind of starting from scratch, you know, Mies van der Rohe said it's the art of putting 2 bricks together. That's architecture. But he does this in completely unorthodox ways. Like, he's basically mortaring bricks end to end into triangles and then stacking them up. And this is very reminiscent of a steel structure, not a brick structure. And he does this a lot throughout his work. And it's, you know, it would never happen in the United States. Really as a result of having more resources than them. And so through this scarcity, he has such an imagination for these things. And he is a real poet and inspiration. He's become one of my favorite architects, and this work it's just amazing.
Yeah, it seems it's really incredible, and it's so different than the way in which the mock-ups, the full-scale mock-ups were used here in Miami with the Perez Art Museum. I was wondering, again, connecting architecture to art, and this is kind of something that we talk about a lot in these kind of Zen sessions, is how things are connected. But maybe you could talk a little bit about how those prototypes worked. I mean, if you wanted to show an image of them, to share a screen again with an image or two to talk about that, people might really like to see how. As you say, the building was kind of built twice. It was built once as a mock-up.
Let me do that.
And then another time it was built as a obviously as the full-scale thing. We had somebody from the audience was wondering if you, with your drawings and your work, do you ever do work that you make available to the public? Like, is your work only for your clients, or do you also do things that other people can acquire?
What do you
mean? It's like your sketches and your drawings and the things that you do, you're kind of in your own work. Before we started talking about the buildings, this came in, and wondering whether anybody else has acquired those from you, whether they're galleries or other.
Only a few private collectors. In fact, you know, I wish more would. That giant plywood pavilion I put in storage for a year, and after I paid a few $1,000s to store it, we had to just get rid of it, and we thought we'll build it again. A lot of my architectural models adorn the walls of my mother's house and fill the attics of my cousins. But I'm a little bit of a back rat about, I really enjoy building models. And I learned to build, I think I really began to excel at architecture in school. It really started to make sense to me when I would build the models. And I had a harder time visualizing in 2 dimensions. I had an easier time doing it 3-dimensionally and then trying to draw the 3-dimensional object. I since teach my students to try to be more disciplined about their drawing and allow the freedom of the drawing, like draw it first and then just allow the spontaneity of building, be creative in the process of building.
When we had a question about that, when you mentioned how models help you to understand, when you first were in school and you were thinking about these, how models really helped you to understand or make, you said make sense of the building. What, can you unpack that a little bit for the lay observer who might not understand what that means to you? What does it mean to you to make sense of it, like through models?
You know, I guess it would be equivalent to, like, you know, being a composer and writing music and kind of understanding the song by writing it down versus playing it in a way. And to me, it's very abstract, and that's also something the book is about, like the conventions that we are used to using and the core knowledge of architecture, you know, plans, sections, and I really admire those drawings more now than I did in the past. But they also constrain you. And if I can give another example that might help explain this, an important one in the book that I didn't know about until I was researching it, the great architects in California named Morphosis, Tom Main and Michael Rotundi, built a house called the CDLT house. And they were thinking exactly about this issue, how, you know, it's strange that we toil away drawing the building. We don't usually build it ourselves. We draw it, we represent it, and then we give it to someone else to build. And they kind of said, you know, that doesn't allow you the opportunity to be spontaneous as in jazz. In jazz, there's a kind of pattern to it, but there's all this syncopation and improvisation that exists between the beats. So they said, we want to build a house without drawings. So they would go to the job site every day and basically give verbal instructions to the builder, like build a wall over here 12 feet, let's bring it together over here with this corner. And they just had to go every single day, but it allowed them to just in the moment kind of, let's try this, let's do this. Instead of sort of predetermining the entire thing in advance, they just designed it as they built it, which I don't know of, you know, aside from primitive huts, I don't know of like other examples of that really. And so that was a real breakthrough precedent for me. When I learned of that, I thought, when I was thinking about a mock-up, it's between drawing and building. Well, we kind of know what it's like when we're constrained to just drawing and somebody else builds. What is it when we're just building without drawing? And I like that as a kind of bookend for the example.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a beautiful example. But maybe you can talk now about Pam. I want to make sure we get a little bit of the Perez Art Museum in here because it's such a local icon. But maybe you can talk a little bit about the full-scale prototype. I don't know whether everybody saw these mock-ups like the one you're showing pictured here, but they were amazing. So
this is a photo I took when I first moved to Miami. I knew the guy who was documenting the construction, and I met the architects. And so I took a tour, and I saw these were all full-scale mock-ups that they build on the side of the building. And you know, they're trying to resolve certain construction issues. You know, it's less about, is this thing going to collapse, like Frank Lloyd Wright, but still all of these, you know, bringing together different materials, even observing the shadow patterns and the texture of the materials. And when you go there, it's such a rich textural building. You see concrete used like wood, like wooden board forms, but they're really cast planks that are then hung on it like wood. And then they hand chip the entire exterior of the building. So here you see them, you know, trying some of these things. This was their, just to give you an idea, you may not know this, but when they first designed the building, it was going to be precast concrete. So these were going to be vertical planks of concrete that they precast. And Herzog and Nemron are Swiss. They designed this in Switzerland. And they actually constructed this huge mock-up of these big precast wooden planks, which were not real, but they CNC milled form liners and cast concrete to have a kind of faux wood grain. And they really wanted to, give an idea of evoke a different materiality, even though they kind of acknowledged they were constrained to building with concrete because it's Miami and the wind and the salt and the water and things like that. So this was initially the idea. They ruled it out after, just working through the design development of the project. They finally decided they'd be better off working with concrete, but concrete is a mysterious, it's a lot of chemical reactions. And so, they kind of encountered all kinds of unpredictable things, such as the concrete staining blue because it was starved from oxygen because the formwork stayed in place for so long. And they had to hire a kind of forensics expert to tell them why these things were happening. I mean, these are, in my opinion, the best architects in the world. They've used concrete a lot, but you kind of mix this universal material like concrete, which exists everywhere, with the specifics of our local climate, and you get unpredictable results, which was kind of interesting. And they acknowledge it, and to their credit, they anticipate those things. So they would build these things to see what happens, because they're not 100% sure what's going to happen when they go and put all these things together. So this is a kind of a bridge from the representational models and media to the building. And in some way, these are much more experimental and exciting to see, like the diversity here. The building is ultimately very refined, but all this experimentation is not, it's really not visible to the public. These were demolished and thrown away later. And it's too bad, but like we couldn't have them in our backyards.
And weren't they also looking at kind of how the building would be used, having, what would it be like to have a building, an exhibition space with walls of concrete inside, and testing some of those surfaces. I love these texture tests, and I think in your book you have a picture of them polishing the concrete to a fine hone inside. So it's everything from that really rough that you show there to the really fine.
Yeah. And this is when they were hiring their contractor. They gave a written brief, which I found this whole process extremely creative. Not necessarily part of the formal design process, but even in terms of hiring the contractor, they gave a kind of recipe and said, build these 3 concretes, one with a smooth out of form finish, one with a raked finish. And this was a detail that came from a previous project in Switzerland where you cast the concrete, but you could spray the form with a product. It's called the form retarder, and it prevents the concrete from really curing as fast as the rest. So when you take the formwork off, you can just kind of scrape it away and get this organic texture. And so they knew what they wanted. They'd done it before. They were looking to see which builder could do the best job, but also like who might have a better solution or a better idea about how to actually do that. So kind of engaging the building part of it creatively, I think is, so admirable. I mean, not every, somebody has to pay for these things also. So you kind of need to be a world-renowned architect to do it, but it's part of their budgeting. It's in their contracts. A certain amount is allocated to doing this. And the results, you can't argue with the results. You have a very rehearsed, orchestrated building in the end. These are the different tools they use to achieve these textures. That's a polish, a grinder. So they were grinding this from down Lake Terrazzo. That's like a small jackhammer. And then these are some more where they were, if you go to the Perez, I don't even know that everyone is aware, but the structure on the outside, it's glass, the glazing is cast concrete. So even what's typically metal, they cast out of concrete, which is very hard to do. And they had to do all kinds of missile impact tests for hurricane, wind velocity, things like that. And you see it here in the building. This big structural element is cast concrete. And then, so you see the wood, the concrete on the inside and the outside.
In a way, just that image that you just showed was so it shows so many different textures and so many different kind of ways in which concrete has been used. It's kind of it's almost like a haiku. It's a beautiful poem of the solidified material that that you've used so successfully in your house. You know, I can't help but think about your house as being kind of another verse in this poem, in this Miami-based concrete poem that seems to be constantly being written and rewritten. And you know, you can see it here and in your house, where you take the concrete and you take you see the stone aggregate in this, and in your house, though, it's wood aggregate. In this building, it's you know, there's kind of a hand-hewn landscape. In yours, there's kind of this almost a vertical hilly landscape. I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm just reflecting a comment that somebody kind of sent me. So one of the viewers. So.
Here you can see them just chipping away on the side of this. I don't know if you remember, but you know, there were guys, and they wanted to limit the amount of people doing it to get a consistent finish. So there were really only 2 or 3 guys who for months were hanging from the side, just hand chipping the exterior. Part of the goal is to hide some of the construction joints to get it to seem uniform. And that's something I also did in my house, to hide the joint between new and old. Yeah, but I love this project. Here are some construction photos of it. Some more of the mock-ups, different textures. There's the guys who are hanging from scaffolding, chipping it by hand. And initially, you'll see in the book, they planned to rake it like they had done the Schaulager Museum in Switzerland. And for a variety of reasons, they weren't able to do that. So they had to come up with a plan B, like, we're gonna have to hand chip this thing because they weren't able to rake it to get the organic quality that they wanted.
Well, Nick, there was a question about whether wood was used in part of that joint with the glass. I was talking about the different moments there. Yeah, going back to that, whether there's a wood component in there. I'm not sure. You would know.
Yeah, if you go there, you'll see this is wood, and actually the exterior sill cap is wood as well. They use the locally, well, it's not a local wood. It's called Greenheart. It comes from Guyana. But they use it to make dock pilings. It holds up really well in the tropics, and it ruins your tools just cutting it. It's so dense. It's an amazing material. So you can basically get this material for free, like reclaimed from old docks, and then they mill it down, and but it's very expensive to process and to turn into lumber. But yeah, so the joint, you see it everywhere. Once you I didn't realize this even, but once you talk to them, you saw it in that early model. They really wanted to evoke. I titled the chapter, I think, you know, between natural and unnatural, because, you know, wood is really seen as a kind of organic, natural material. Even though concrete exists in certain natural forms, you know, it's sedimentary rock, metamorphic rock. We tend to think of it as totally artificial material, a kind of unnatural thing. So you can see they're kind of resigned to using concrete, but trying to, you know, bring out as much natural quality and emulate as much organic quality as they can, which is a tough thing to do with concrete. But I think they do a great job. Even these things on the outside, that's the outside terrace. And so they're casting the concrete to look like wooden boards, like a boardwalk. And it's just really clever detailing everywhere.
Well, I think we're gonna. I mean, I love that kind of meditating on the materiality of the building, and I think for me, maybe just because I'm also an architect, that kind of provides a sense of grounding. Like, I'm always looking at nature and looking at how materials are formed and then how we transform them. And you've kind of, I think, shown some of the most powerful and beautiful examples of that, and how close to materiality these full-scale mock-ups have kept the architects who've used them, you know, keeping them very close to the materials and their potential. So I just wanted to kind of thank you so much for bringing us to this point, and was wondering if maybe you might stop sharing the screen, or
Oh, sure.
it's okay. But
I paid a lot for those photos, so I just wanted to.
yeah, okay, all right. But and at this point, no, I really want to thank you. I want to invite. So we usually end these by allowing people to. Yes, I put that inside in the building. If you want to put something like a way for people to contact you in the chat, you're welcome
Sure.
to do that. Whatever you want to share, you might get, because people know a lot more about you now, and they might have questions that weren't answered during this talk. But so Deborah, would you like to take a moment to tell us a little bit about next week's, and then we'll open this up for a big thank you, Nick. Wait, Deborah, you might need to unmute.
All right, I was muted.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. That was amazing. I really appreciated it. I hope you'll join us next week, everyone who's listening tonight. We are going to have a night of LGBTQ poetry with two amazing voices in that space. Joy Layden from the trans community. She is a professor at Yeshiva University in New York City. And Julie Marie Wade, who is a professor at FIU and very accomplished, not only in the poetry space, but she's also a prose writer. Their poetry is very personal and truly universal also. So please do join us. They're going to read and talk about their lives.